Hello, or ni hao as they say in China. My name is Whit Bentley and today I will be educating you on Chinese architecture, starting from its origin and moving into fundamental principles and styles, and finally concluding with where Chinese architecture stands today. In Chinese architecture, one can find a deep and rich history. Chinese architecture has developed and evolved over the course of the last several thousands of years in conjunction with Chinese culture. The principles found in Chinese construction and architecture have remained fairly constant even as time has progressed. Despite this consistency across the millennia, each Chinese dynasty has contributed to the overall aesthetic of Chinese architecture as a whole. For example, before the Song dynasty, the silhouette of gables in northern China were fairly straight. As time progressed through the Song, Yuan, Ming, and Qing dynasties, the gable silhouette changed to be more curved like one can see today. The Han dynasty built many tombs that are still dug up today. Sadly, most above-ground Chinese structures built before the 8th century have not survived. This is because, for the most part, structures were built out of wood, which is not the most resilient building material. It is prone to both fire and termites. The oldest surviving structure in China is the Nanshan Temple in Shanxi. It was built during the Sui dynasty in 782. Since the 8th century, we can see examples of architecture from all the dynasties, and in this way we can observe how Chinese architecture has evolved over time. Along with this evolution, we can observe 5 main features that have become fundamental and key to nearly all Chinese architecture. These features are architectural bilateral symmetry, enclosure, hierarchy, horizontal emphasis, and cosmological concepts. Chinese architecture strongly emphasizes articulation and symmetry as both symbolize balance, which the Chinese find important. These two features are found in all Chinese buildings, be they simple and modest peasant homes to large and grand imperial palaces and residences. Even when homes and buildings are renovated and changed, symmetry is maintained. If a wing is added on one side of a building, a wing of identical dimension is added to the other side. It is also important that a building have an odd number of bays or rooms, with many having a central room and equal branches jutting off from this central room. Gardens, on the other hand, tend not to have symmetry. While the role of balance and symmetry is present in nearly all Chinese architecture, so too is enclosure, provided there is enough space. Many Chinese properties have outside structure in the border of the property that enclose inner structures within the property. These enclosures, known as courtyards or skywells, are very important in Chinese building. One of the main functions is temperature and regulation and ventilation. Many courtyards in northern China are designed to block cold wind. Thanks to courtyards, buildings stay relatively cool in the summers, yet warm in the winter. This is ideal for China, which is a temperate place with extreme seasons. Hierarchy is yet another feature within Chinese architecture that is essential. Hierarchy means that buildings within a property are strictly positioned. One can observe such a hierarchy in the placement of doors within a complex or estate. Buildings that have doors that face an estate's front are considered to be the most important on the property. Buildings whose doors face the sides of the property are held in the next highest level of esteem. And finally, buildings whose doors are positioned towards the rear of the property are considered the least important. Building placement also determines who stays in what buildings. Buildings toward the back of a property are reserved for elders and monuments to ancestors, while buildings in the middle are for younger family members, and buildings near the front are for servants or hired help. Emphasis on horizontal width is placed upon buildings belonging to the wealthy in China. The Forbidden City is a perfect example of this. Cosmological concepts related to feng shui and Taoism are very important in Chinese building and architecture. Door gods are placed over doors to ward off evil and welcome good fortune. Plants, considered lucky, like pomegranate trees, are often planted. Often, water is incorporated into a property via ponds or small waterfalls. Ideally, buildings are placed with hills and mountains to their rear. These rules and quirks were not just thought about on a structure-by-structure basis. Cities in China were also planned in accordance with cosmological concepts. In traditional Chinese architecture, there exist three main types of buildings and estates. These styles are commoner, imperial, and religious. Commoner architecture is the style of home that belonged to those who were not related to the imperial family, such as merchants, farmers, or bureaucrats. Typically, large extended families would live together in enclosed compounds. Some commoner compounds resemble small fortresses because they were built to protect from bandits. These structures, usually circular in shape, were typically found in southern China. Commoner housing was extremely regulated in all its aspects. Certain colors for a compound's exterior were reserved for certain classes of people. This regulation carried through into imperial architecture, which was reserved for the emperor and his family. Yellow roof tiles were exclusively used on imperial buildings, as yellow was the imperial color. Red walls and columns further characterized imperial buildings. The five-clawed dragon was exclusive to the imperial family, and only imperial buildings could be adorned with it. These strict rules, along with several others, helped to enforce a clear difference between common folk and the imperial family, creating an air of exclusivity. The third and final type of architecture in China is religious architecture. Religious architecture in China is primarily made up of buildings built for either Buddhism or Taoism. Both religions incorporate pagodas into their architecture. Pagodas, or baota, are tiered towers with several eaves. Pagodas came to China with Buddhism from the Indian subcontinent thousands of years ago. They were originally meant to house Buddhist relics, such as the remains of revered monks. Old pagodas can be identified because they have 4 sides, while newer pagodas tend to have 8. Overall, Buddhist architecture follows a pattern fairly similar to imperial architecture. Buddhist monasteries typically have a statue of a bodhisattva in their front building. As one goes further back into the complex, statues of the Buddhas are encountered in a great hall. Monks live along these sides of this central hall in different branches. Taoist temples and buildings are more similar to the architecture of commoners. Buildings tend to be less ornate than those found in Buddhism. Taoist buildings and complexes adhere strictly to feng shui. After all this focus on traditional Chinese architecture, you may be wondering about modern Chinese architecture. Don't worry, I have you covered. As China has modernized, so too has Chinese architecture. Ancient architectural principles are still applied as much as they can be in new buildings, even as buildings grow up, and away. This is reflected in some skyscrapers throughout China. Over the last several thousand years, architecture in China has progressed and will continue to do so as China rockets into the future. Thanks for watching.